Alright guys, such coming again. I hope you're doing well and enjoying all day. So far, OpTic are still the joint #1 seed in the Call of Duty League despite their defeat to Kenny and the Los Angeles Thieves yesterday, but since the new year things have clearly taken a turn for the worse, 1-2 since the start of 2026, and lots of reaction in terms of what they need to change if they want to get back on track going into the first major. Octane and Formula, especially with thoughts on what their SMGs need to change and maybe the map set this team is going for if they want to turn things around. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Nice little 1v3 here from Huke on the Colossus in a $1,000 chow the other day. A map, of course, that OpTic don't play an awful lot of. They do like to play a bit of Scar. That is more of an AR haven, as we have seen. We'll get into that topic in the coming minutes. Don, he absolutely nailed it. He predicted Thieves to take down OpTic 3-1. Look, Kenny wasn't far off dropping 40 game 1 as well, so it was definitely a surprising result yesterday in some regards, but at the same time, Kenny against OpTic, you could argue it was also predictable. Now, the other key talking point of Thieves lately, at the end of the day, look, OpTic have lost to a team with Scrap, HyDra and aBeZy on it, and Kenny dropping a 1.3. On some level, you might say there's no real shame in that. Thieves, it is kind of a super team at the end of the, whatever your perspective. However, there have been questions on aBeZy and, of course, mainly Kenny, but especially aBeZy's level as well as of late. Ben J was very critical of aBeZy's play over the last couple of years on FaZe, and now it's the same story here. He actually talked about going into this series that in Hardpoint his decision-making seems a little bit lackluster. As we know, yesterday he pulled out the AR for a lot of the time. The M15 was a key feature of aBeZy's play, and part of that was the maps they were playing on, but it felt like that was maybe helping him play in a better spot. At the end of the day, we've saw these M15 and Drazah changes and nerfs, but the M15 is arguably just as good as the Drazah at close range, and it is better at longer range, so we're seeing a lot of it in play. Not to say that, the M15 is, we're going to see 8 of them on the map all of a sudden again, but Thieves have moved slightly more in that direction, and it does seem to be helping. Ben J says with Kenny or with Neum, he's got his concerns. And look, it is only one series, right? It's one series. Kenny drops a 1.3 on OpTic. What will we see next weekend? Is Kenny going to be going back to dropping 0.8 or something? We'll see. It's not like he's had terrible series this year. Like, his numbers this year are actually pretty good. Like, they weren't even bad, given with respect to the rest of his team. I think he was at like a 0.87 or something, 0.88, 0.87. aBeZy was at a similar number going into the OpTic series. Obviously, that's not great, but it's not like Kenny's doing 0.6s. He has just had the occasional real stinker map that's brought down the average. If you can avoid the real stinker maps, Kenny this year, on average, has been fine. Like, Kenny's median map is actually very solid for his role and what he's trying to do. It's just his, mean gets dragged down by some bad outliers. That was not the case against OpTic. He actually had the outliers the other way. Kenny, of course, was talking in the interview that he feels like sometimes he's just overcompensating for things, trying to do too much. If he can just lock in, trust my teammates, once I get comfortable, we will be pretty dominant. So, look, Kenny's confident there's at least going to be a runway now with this roster. Again, we'll see. Clearly, there have been some cracks behind the scenes at Thieves. If they go to the major and they get bodied, you can't guarantee that Kenny's not going anywhere, but of course yesterday was a major step in the right direction. He drops a lobby high 1.28 KD, and remarkably enough, in the history of him playing against Thieves, you guys remember last season, just before OpTic went on the stinker run that they did with Kenny for a time, they had that series against Thieves, and Kenny clutched the 1v2 in the round 11 game 5 on the Hacienda Surge to get OpTic the win. So, I don't know what it is with Kenny in these particular matchups, but when he used to be on Thieves playing OpTic, when he was on OpTic playing Thieves, he tended to have a great time against the counterparty, and he's 20-9 in those big games. Big match player, arguably, as ever, tweet your thoughts in the comments below. These were just the numbers real quick if you guys didn't see them in last night's video on how that series transpired. But look, we can talk about Thieves all we like. There's no doubt that OpTic do not feel like the same dominant force they were at the end of last season, and of course, that was not going to be maintained forever. They were on this unbelievable streak through champs, through the World Cup, through the start of this season. you're always going to have a little bit of a correction at some point, and I think we've certainly seen that over the last couple of weekends. Yeah, map 1, Mercules popped takeover, but the rest of the series he was less of a factor, and the rest of the team was in a more tricky position as a result. The real question so far, and Dashy did not have a good series yesterday. When we look at the numbers, Dashy had a 0.78. That's probably his first bad series of the year so far. Mostly Dashy's been pretty damn good. But it's been the SMGs that have caused most of the talking points so far. I mean, CDL haters back at it again, but I also don't really know what Shotzzy was doing here, running backwards with the ball. He doesn't want to take the challenge, that he just gives away the cap for free. Questionable plays out of Shotzzy in the respawn so far this year, and I think that's mainly where the conversation is at the moment, is on the SMGs and OpTic and how they are faring, because Huke he's been a little bit better the last couple of series, but he started out the year pretty shaky, certainly in the respawn modes. And look, Shotzzy historically is not really a first half of the game player. Shotzzy tends to come into his own towards the end, the latter part of the year. We've seen it for many years in a row now. To be fair, last season, Black Ops 6, he did start very well, but that is the exception, not the rule. Shotzzy does tend to take a good couple of months and stages to probably get into things. But Shotzzy's also been talking a bit of trash, right? It wasn't long ago he was saying that he thinks the other teams are pretty terrible, FaZe especially are particularly bad. The league right now is incredibly competitive, there's no doubt, but there's also no doubt that OpTic's SMGs need to do a better job. Now, I do think part of that is the map pool they choose to play. They don't play a lot of Blackheart, they don't play a lot of Colossus, they don't play a lot of SMG maps. And look, you've got Dashy and Mercules, maybe you want to let them fry, but there's also an argument that if you're going to play a lot of Scar, you know, when Shotzzy was forcing the NPC on Scar, probably not especially wise. And even forcing the Drazah on Scar does not seem to be an ideal strategy either. But yeah, these are just the numbers. I'm going to put it in reverse so you guys can see everything. Huke is, where's Huke here? Huke's at 26th. This is just hardpoint KD. You can look at overall KD and everything on the site if you like. You go to Breaking Point, you go to Stats, Player Leaderboards, you can find all this stuff. Lqgend, of course, now out of the league. He was at a 0.77 in hardpoint. But apart from Lqgend, Shotzzy is number 49, right? So he's actually outside of, because we've had a couple of changes in the Pro League now with Exceed coming in. So there's been 50 players so far this season. And Shotzzy's at 49. He's behind Purge, he's behind Slasher, who's now gone, behind Abe, Kismet, Skies, etc. I mean, look, HyDra's at a 0.91, right? So he's at 42nd in the league right now. It's not just Shotzzy who's struggling to, as top player, to put things together on the SMG in this game at the moment. It is a challenge, and it's far too early to count out a player like Shotzzy this season, but it's also very much true that he needs to get better, right? I think he will, for sure, and by the end of the season, we're likely having a very different conversation, but he definitely needs to improve. And it's not just individually, it's also how he plays with the team. We saw some comments from the OpTic guys yesterday on the watch party, like, what are these clowns doing in the overload? Why are they not pushing for it, trying to press home the advantage? Especially when they were down 3-0, they had to take a risk at that moment. They elected not to do so. So Octane talks about this, Shotzzy's play, especially in hardpoint, how he needs to approach things, like his theory, and this is actually before that series against the Los Angeles Thieves. Maybe that proved to be true within the next couple of days. And Formal also talks about it as well, certainly after the Overload loss, about the way that they're approaching the game right now, the SMGs, and how they need to change that if they want to get to the next level.
For the Legend right now, yeah. 49th out of 48 players is not great. I don't know. I think Ant just like, OpTic is obviously good, and I still think they're most likely the best team. As of right now, obviously we get to see the rest of these teams play, but Ant just has to rethink the way that he plays this game. I think his like pinch every life, play away from his team gimmick that like worked at the start of the year, specifically in Overload, I don't think is like the way to play right now. I think team ball is just like much more important in this title, at least at its current pace. I don't know. I think that like a lot of the hero solo stuff that Ant likes to do at the start of the season, it just doesn't work right now. Unless he's getting every fucking kill, obviously, which he's not right now. So it's just not working.
Like, say, like, it's gonna sound biased because like Brandon's my boy, but like the way that OpTic's playing that, they're sending Kyler and Ant just to their base. Like, yo, go get us an opening.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So Brandon's coming on spawn like fighting war, probably.
Yeah, no
I
flow.
could see
You
that.
know, like he's just fighting war. It probably feels insane on the map. You know?
Yeah.
Like both the ARs get fucked over. Look at them. They're both just like same stat line. You know?
Just getting ran at by Paco and aBeZy just in your shit the whole map.
Like I don't know. It's just.
Then
Falcons 5.
yeah, I was gonna say I don't even know if we can put us 5 right here. Riyadh's look good.
All right, go ahead. Us or Thieves 6.
Oh Jesus.
Go ahead. Chat, what do you guys think? Us or Thieves 6?
Look away, everybody look away. I mean, as of right now, you have to. We just look like piss.
I do want to
We're
say
1 and 2 after the break.
I do want to say super recency bias, basically impossible. A lot of these teams are
The
interchangeable.
league is extremely competitive right now. OpTic are still the joint #1 seed, but it's joint between 3 different teams. So the ReeaL Falcons are, at least they were appearing here as the #1 seed. I believe the #1 seed as it stands is actually FaZe, because they have the hardest strength of schedule. So if you look at the teams that they have played, the average record of those teams, I think, is stronger than of OpTic and Falcons. So I think technically FaZe are #1 here, but the reality is Falcons, OpTic and FaZe, they're all tied at 4-2 series count, 13-10 map count. I mean, with the exception of Surge, who are 4-17, this is almost undoubtedly the most competitive that the league has ever looked, to be honest. And I know that it's early days in this game, it's online Call of Duty, there will be teams that separate themselves from the pack, but we've seen some big upsets. We've seen teams getting pushed to Game 5 surprisingly. I mean, even Cloud9, they're 1-5. They can't win a final search to save their life, but they're 11-15 map count. They've won a good handful of maps against some very top teams. You know, Cloud9, they're not a terrible team. They have no bottle, to be fair, but they're not terrible, really. They've been competitive enough, but they're 11th in the Pro League right now. And the top team is ReeaL Falcons, at least joint. It is the usual suspect: OpTic, FaZe, Toronto, Gentlemates, Thieves behind that, of course. Ravens have made their way up to 3-2 as well. But it's absolutely all to play for right now. I mean, it's so hard to... I don't think we've ever had a qualifier stint quite like this, really. Usually there's at least one team who's like 6-1, 7-0, and there's usually one team who's getting bodied. And to be fair, that is still true. We still have Surge kind of off the back of the league at 1-5 of 4-17 map counts. They're closing in on Zoomer's numbers. They actually can't quite get there, unfortunately. There's only a few more maps to lose. But the rest of the league is all over the place. And yeah, Cloud9, they're not going to be in winners, but G2 still have a chance. They're 2-4. They've got a very good map count. I mean, G2's map count is 13-15. That's real solid for a 2-4 team. If they get a win next weekend, they could be back in the mix. I mean, it's absolutely all over the shop here. We could theoretically have a ton of teams tied at 4-3. I think it's possible. It's pretty unlikely. Some teams will get to 5, I'd imagine, out of Falcons, OpTic and FaZe. And actually, Toronto and Paris and even Thieves, they still have 2 games to go. And so do Ravens. So they could also get to 5 wins. But right now, calling the final standings after next weekend is absolute nightmare to try and do. Look, OpTic, FaZe, those teams, they've got to 4 wins, they'll be fine. You'd think 3 wins would be enough, but actually 9 teams, like sometimes 3 wins is enough. We've seen qualifier stages where to get to the top 8 seed, 3 and 4 is fine. But there are 9 teams currently with 3 wins, so at least one of those teams isn't going to make it, and maybe multiple, depending on what happens next weekend. But look, OpTic are still right up there for sure, but they started December very strong. They also played arguably some weaker competition at the time. I mean, they played Falcons' first game when Falcons have made some big improvements, of course, lately. Falcons are definitely more of a threat now than it felt like they were initially. And Scump and Methods, therefore, they put OpTic down at 7th in the power rankings. They think with recent results and losing to Thieves in the way that they did, that OpTic, yeah, they can't put them too much higher than that. Again, does it feel like a bit of an overreaction to some online play? Sure, I get that logic, but also it has now been multiple weeks where we are watching Shotzzy and Huke, and from an SMG perspective, not play especially cohesively. And look, we talked about it a lot when they played G2 and other teams back in December, that Mercules was bailing them out big time in some of these series. And we're now seeing that Merc can't do that every single series. And if he's not going to, then yeah, we're going to start to see OpTic need to become better as a team overall. And it's just a competitive league at the moment. It does feel like over the Christmas New Year break, things didn't go to plan, but also it's not the end of the world for OpTic by any means. They can still bounce back going into the major. And also, you're not going to be able to play at an S tier level all year. It is what it is. But this time last year, pretty much exactly this time last year, Shotzzy was talking at large, wasn't he? This is pretty much January 2025 when he was saying all the other teams are terrible, terrible players, terrible teams, they don't know what they're doing. And then shortly after that, we know what happened. So this year, Shotzzy has kept his mouth a little bit more quiet, but right now it feels like OpTic are the team that needs to be watching some VOD to understand where they need to go to improve. So intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.